The story begins by introducing a man named Bear, who is currently infatuated with one of his co-workers named Nikki. Bear plans to confess his feelings to her, but he decides to discuss it first with his two other friends, Ian and Sarah. According to them, Bear's planned confession sounds incredibly cringe, and making his move that way will only make him look ridiculous. Sarah suggests that Bear should buy something for Nikki instead to win her heart over. Meanwhile, Ian advises Bear not to be overly poetic because they both know Nikki is not the type of person who enjoys romantic cliches. As a fellow guy, Ian encourages Bear to focus on building an emotional connection first. Ian even encourages Bear to invite Nikki out for a drink or ask her on a proper date. Furthermore, Ian suggests using their usual hangout spot as the perfect location to confess his feelings. He reminds Bear that if Nikki truly means that much to him, he needs to make the most of his time. Not long after, Bear returns home only to make a devastating discovery. His cat, Sandy, has died after accidentally consuming some of Bear's medication that had fallen onto the floor. Bear quickly cleans the floor where the accident happened and places the cat's body inside a plastic bag. Afterward, he lies down on his bed while scrolling through Nikki's Instagram profile. Just then, Nikki unexpectedly calls him. Nikki asks Bear to meet him at their usual hangout spot. Bear initially declines the invitation, making up an excuse that he needs to finish some chores. However, Nikki suddenly mentions that she has something important to tell him. During the call, Nikki can be heard screaming after her crystal necklace accidentally fell down the sink drain. Looking at the clock, Bear recalls the advice given by Ian and Sarah. He senses that tonight is the perfect opportunity to finally confess his feelings to Nikki. Bear goes to a local shop to buy a replacement necklace for the one Nikki just lost. While browsing, he also comes across a strange toy called the One Wish Willow. The packaging claims the item can grant a single wish to anyone who snaps it into two pieces. Finding the toy quite unique, Bear decides to pick one up. He asks the shopkeeper if any customers who bought the toy had ever returned to complain. The shopkeeper coldly replied that the object is merely a collector's item, and most people who buy it never actually open it. Bear suspects the toy is just a scam that does not actually grant wishes. However, the shopkeeper adds with a sinister tone that the only people who ever complained about the toy were those whose loved ones had suddenly died. Not long after, Bear heads over to meet Nikki at their usual spot. However, when he arrives, he finds Nikki deeply engaged in a conversation with Sarah. Bear quickly signals Ian that he intends to confess his feelings tonight. Understanding the cue, Ian distracts Sarah and leads her away, leaving Bear and Nikki alone. Following Ian's earlier advice, Bear buys Nikki a drink and cracks a few jokes, which successfully makes her more open and friendly. Seizing the moment, Bear attempts to confess his feelings, but before he can speak, he is constantly interrupted by either the bartender or Ian himself. Frustrated, Bear decides to drop the idea for the night. They eventually raise a toast to Sandy, Bear's recently deceased cat. Sarah, who had just found out about the cat, immediately hugs Bear in sympathy. As the night grows late, they all decide to head home. Bear offers to drive Nikki back. During the ride, Nikki expresses her deep sorrow over Sandy's death and mentions that Bear should have called her so she could comfort him. Bear remarks that the workplace will feel completely different once Nikki leaves her job. Nikki admits that leaving is difficult, but she wants to write and create something meaningful in her life. Bear brings up the possibility of her writing a romance story, jokingly reminding her that everyone knows she despises romantic cliches. Nikki smiles and says that Bear is the only person she can share these kinds of thoughts with. Bear then mentions that he brought a little something for her. When they arrive outside her house, Nikki mentions that Sarah had been asking about Bear's ex-girlfriend. Nikki then asks Bear how he truly feels about Sarah, noting that it is very obvious Sarah likes him. Bear clarifies that he only views Sarah as a friend. Nikki begins to walk toward her front door, but Bear suddenly calls out her name. Nikki turns around and asks directly, "Do you like me, Bear?" She adds that if he does, now is the perfect time to tell her everything. Unfortunately, Bear loses his nerve and claims they are just ordinary friends. Disappointed, Nikki goes inside. Feeling that he has completely wasted his chance, Bear pulls out the One Wish Willow toy. He unwraps it, states aloud his wish for Nikki to love him more than anything else in the world, and snaps the toy into two pieces.
At that exact moment, Nikki, who should have been inside her house, suddenly stops at the front door. She walks back toward Bear and asks for the gift he promised earlier. Bear makes an excuse, claiming he accidentally left it at his house. From this point on, Nikki's behavior begins to feel incredibly strange. She even invites Bear inside her house to comfort him over the loss of his cat. Bear looks at the snapped toy in his hand and grows suspicious, asking Nikki if she is truly okay because her attitude has shifted so drastically. To his surprise, Nikki insists on coming home with him instead. Suspecting she might just be drunk because she's acting so chaotic and out of character, Bear begs her to go inside and promises they can talk about everything tomorrow. However, Nikki refuses and tearfully confesses how devastated she feels whenever she is away from him. She then reveals that her father is currently dying, making her life incredibly heavy at the moment. She explains that when she tried to enter her house, the sudden reminder of her father made it impossible for her to step inside alone. Seeing her distress, Bear ultimately agrees to take Nikki to his house. Upon arriving at Bear's home, Nikki takes a deep breath and remarks that the house is filled with Bear's scent. Bear requests that they sleep in separate rooms, and Nikki apologizes for her overwhelming behavior. However, she suddenly begs Bear to sleep close to her, claiming her mind will spiral out of control if she is left alone in the room. Bear eventually gives in and agrees to stay in the room with her. Oddly enough, a moment later, Nikki briefly seems to snap back to normal, looking confused, as if suddenly realizing what they are doing. But the clarity does not last long, and she falls back under the strange influence, bursting into tears without warning. While she rests, Bear searches the internet to see if the One-Wish Willow can actually grant wishes. He finds no satisfying answers. Some users claim the object does not work at all, while others swear that their wishes actually came true. This mixed information only leaves Bear more confused and filled with doubt. Shortly after, Nikki calls out to Bear, asking him to come and sleep right next to her. When Bear wakes up the next morning, he discovers that Nikki is no longer in the room. He immediately searches the house and finds Nikki outside conducting a strange, small ritual for Sandy's funeral. Witnessing this, Bear feels that her actions are quite bizarre, unusual, and honestly a bit unsettling. As the days progress, Bear returns to work and confides in Ian about everything that happened. Bear explains that Nikki's demeanor has changed completely, as if she is under severe emotional distress. She has become highly sensitive, prone to sudden mood swings, and sometimes bursts into hysterical screams without warning. Bear also mentions that Nikki's father is currently dying. However, Ian points out that Nikki has never actually cared about her father, as their relationship had been estranged for a long time. This is where the cracks in reality become undeniable. Bear shares another incident that left him completely baffled, which was when Nikki suddenly kissed him and then burst into tears for no apparent reason. Ian asked if Bear had already confessed his feelings, thinking that might have triggered her emotional state. But when Bear admits he hasn't said anything yet, the whole situation feels even more bizarre. Instead of feeling happy, Nikki's radical shift in behavior is starting to terrify Bear. Even though Bear genuinely likes her, Ian concludes that Nikki simply must still be under the influence of alcohol from the night before, causing her personality to warp and become unstable.
When night falls and their shift ends, Ian offers to drive Nikki home under the pretense of retrieving his books. Bear uses this window of opportunity to investigate whether the alcohol Nikki consumed the previous night had any documented side effects matching her current behavior. However, after checking the bottles, he finds no such evidence. Shortly after, Nikki returns to Bear's house to apologize for her behavior, having heard from Ian that she had frightened Bear. Bear asks her directly, "Do you remember everything that happened?" Nikki replies that she remembers most of it, assuming it was just the alcohol making her lose control and say things she shouldn't have. However, she then flips the script and accuses Bear of taking advantage of the situation.
Bear immediately denies the accusation, but Nikki quickly shifts again, admitting that she actually really loves the closeness they share now. She also confesses that she has known about Bear's feelings for her all along. Hearing this, Bear is overjoyed to learn that his love is reciprocal. When he asks since when she started feeling this way, Nikki explains it has been happening for a long time, and the previous night only solidified the potential of their relationship. Nikki then demands to know if Bear truly loves her. When Bear says yes, the two officially enter a relationship and openly display their affection in front of everyone. One evening, while Bear and Nikki are out on a date, Ian suddenly calls. Bear is forced to answer, which immediately causes Nikki's expression to sour. Over the phone, Ian reveals that he did some digging regarding Nikki's father. It turns out that her father is not dying at all and is actually perfectly healthy. Bear is left completely bewildered as to why Nikki would fabricate such a lie, while Ian suspects she is merely playing a twisted game to gain Bear's undivided attention. Sensing a trap, Ian warns Bear that Nikki might be planning something dangerous that could ultimately put Bear's own life at risk. Bear returns to the table intending to interrogate Nikki about the lies, but he hesitates out of politeness. At that exact moment, Nikki hands him a gift, a tiger's eye stone. She claims it is a family heirloom believed to boost a person's self-confidence. When Bear asks why she is giving it to him, Nikki answers that she loves him deeply and cannot live without him. Seizing the opportunity, Bear asks him one more specific question. Do you love me more than anything else in the world? Through this question, Bear desperately wants to know if his magical wish from the One-Wish Willow had actually come true. Unbelievably, Nikki answers yes, declaring that she loves him more than anyone. Bear then tries to bring up her father's supposedly critical condition. Suddenly, Nikki begins talking erratically, losing control of her speech before aggressively shifting the subject. Seeing her volatile reaction, Bear is forced to drop the subject and stops questioning her altogether. Later that night, Bear wakes up and realizes Nikki is no longer beside him. He looks around and finds her standing in the dark corner of the room, wearing his jacket. Nikki is weeping, claiming she just had a nightmare where Bear didn't love her, which she says completely contradicts her own deep feelings. Terrified by her erratic behavior, Bear tries to calm her down, assuring her that he does love her, before asking her to go back to sleep. Suddenly, Nikki screams hysterically, demanding to know why he doesn't love her, before running to hide behind a flower vase. Shortly after, she abruptly calms down and returns to bed.
The next morning, Bear wakes up to a horrifying discovery. Nikki has cut his hair while he was asleep. Bear firmly warns her never to do something like that again, but Nikki only responds with a deeply unsettling smile. Bear begs her to stop her unnatural behavior, such as staring at him while he sleeps or moving in bizarre, jerky patterns. Nikki promises she won't do it again and says she will apologize if it happens. Feeling a brief moment of relief, Bear gets ready for work. However, as he attempts to leave, he finds the front door completely sealed shut with layers of duct tape. Nikki casually remarks that he can just stay home if escaping is too difficult. Bear forces the door open and leaves for work, while behind him, Nikki flashes a rigid, terrifying grimace. At the workplace, Bear opens the lunchbox Nikki prepared for him. Inside, he finds a photo of himself and Sarah, heavily suggesting that Nikki despises their closeness. Noticing his distress, Sarah asks Bear why he looks so gloomy, but Bear brushes it off and begins to eat. Then, Bear brings up Sarah's previous comment about Nikki only viewing him as a friend. Sarah admits she is jealous of their relationship, but adds that the sudden shift between them feels completely unnatural. During their chat, Sarah receives rejection letters from several universities she applied to, though she is still holding out hope for one final choice. Attempting to comfort her, Bear shares his food, and Sarah playfully takes a bite from his lunchbox. Horror sets in as Bear realizes the meat he is eating is actually the cooked remains of his dead cat, Sandy. Gagging, Bear immediately vomits the food. That evening, Ian drives Bear home.
Ian desperately tries to warn Bear about Nikki's escalating, dangerous behavior, reminding him how terrified he has been over the past few days. Perplexed by the magic's hold, Bear fiercely defends Nikki, insisting that they love each other and that their relationship is perfectly fine. Sensing a trap, Ian remains highly suspicious. He invites Bear to a boys' night on the strict condition that Nikki is not allowed to come, adding that he will ensure Sarah stays home as well. Arriving at his driveway, Bear prepares to confront Nikki about the horrific act of cooking his cat, but as he reaches for the door handle, his eyes catch the discarded packaging of the One Wish Willow, which features a customer service hotline on the back. Desperate, Bear calls the number and asks if there is any way to cancel or alter his wish. The representative coldly explains that they do not handle cancellations. Bear then asks if the love he received from the wish is even real. When Bear presses for what he should do next, the operator gasps in shock upon realizing Bear is still alive. The customer service agent explains that a wish can only be voided if the person who made it dies. As long as Bear remains alive, he bears the moral responsibility of facing the horrific consequences of his request. Left with no choice, a numb Bear walks into his house. Inside, Nikki appears completely disheveled and is acting stranger than ever. She frantically admits to eating live insects, which has made her violently ill. Disgusted with herself, she locks herself in the bathroom to clean up. Through the door, Bear tries to maintain his sanity, demanding to know if she truly cooked his cat and warning her that this madness must stop. He then informs her that Ian has invited him to a boys' night and that she cannot come. Upon hearing this, Nikki unleashes a deafening shriek. Refusing to accept his words, she maliciously reveals that Sarah actually called her directly and that Sarah is absolutely planning to attend the event.
In the end, Bear is forced to bring Nikki along to the gathering. Upon their arrival, they find that Sarah is indeed already there, as Ian had correctly predicted that Bear wouldn't be able to leave Nikki behind. Shortly after, the group tries to break the tension by playing games and joking around together. However, Nikki suddenly bursts into an exaggerated, unnatural fit of laughter, making everyone in the room feel incredibly awkward. As the game continues, Nikki draws a dare that requires her to recite a poem. Instead of reading it normally, she delivers the verses in a deeply unsettling manner, sounding like a psychopath giving a chilling warning to everyone present. Time passes, and it becomes Bear's turn to face a dare. His challenge is to kiss the person sitting next to him, who happens to be Sarah. Instantly, Nikki stands up with a dark scowl and violently drags Sarah away from Bear. Nikki screams at the top of her lungs, declaring that no one in the world can truly comprehend the immense scale of her love for Bear. She even threatens that everyone in the room will die if they fail to recognize the sacred bond between her and Bear. Stunned, Ian asks if she is out of her mind. Nikki abruptly shifts her tone, casually claiming she was just joking and telling them to resume the game. But only seconds later, she lapses back into a hysterical frenzy and commits a horrific act of self-harm, smashing a glass cup directly against her own head. The room falls into absolute chaos. Completely bewildered and terrified, Bear decides to cut the night short and drags Nikki back home. Once they are inside the house, Bear demands to know why she had to terrify his friends with such monstrous behavior. Nikki manically admits that she did it on purpose because she could see that Sarah had feelings for Bear. In this heavy moment of realization, Bear finally understands that his original wish was a catastrophic mistake. He used to love Nikki for who she truly was, but now that she loves him with this artificial, obsessive intensity, everything feels corrupted and terrifying. He just wants the old Nikki back, not this broken version. Bear begs her to leave and suggests they take a one-night break from each other to clear their heads. However, Nikki instantly bursts into tears, refusing to leave his side. She desperately pleads for Bear to keep loving her, even weeping as she admits that she no longer possesses the ability to be the normal person she used to be.
This confession makes Bear even more painfully aware of how deeply unnatural this curse is. As Nikki's behavior starts shifting erratically again, Bear's fear intensifies. He is ultimately forced to let her stay the night, at which point she instantly calms down as if nothing had ever happened. In the middle of the night, while Nikki is sound asleep, Bear receives a text message from Sarah. She begs him to meet her secretly at a nearby park because she has something incredibly important to discuss. Bear sneaks out of the house and meets Sarah in her car. At the park, Sarah reveals that she has received her final acceptance letter from the last university and wants to open it together with him. Furthermore, Sarah exposes a massive hidden secret within their friend group. For the past 2 years, Ian and Nikki had been hooking up regularly without any emotional attachment. She explains that Ian's constant interference in Bear and Nikki's relationship was never born out of genuine concern for Bear, but rather out of petty jealousy over losing his casual partner. Before Bear can even process this betrayal, suddenly Nikki appears out of nowhere. She smashes the car window with brutal force and repeatedly slams Sarah's face against the steering wheel, completely crushing her skull and killing her instantly. Following the horrific murder, Nikki looks at Bear and tearfully apologizes. However, in the exact same breath, she maliciously shifts the blame onto him. She gasps that if Bear hadn't sneaked out to meet Sarah in the dead of night, none of this bloodshed would ever have happened. Nikki then coldly orders Bear to help her clean up the crime scene and dispose of Sarah's body. Left paralyzed in the nightmare of his own making, Bear looks down and opens Sarah's final letter. He reads the contents, discovering that Sarah had actually been accepted to her ultimate dream university.
Driven by absolute desperation to stop any more horrors from happening, Bear rushes back to the shop to find another One-Wish Willow. At first glance, he doesn't see the toy on the shelves and assumes it has been completely pulled from circulation. Bear loses his temper and begins aggressively shouting at the shopkeeper, only to discover that the product is still available. Watching Bear spiral into a furious panic, the shopkeeper calmly tells him to let his emotions out. He cynically notes that Bear is throwing a tantrum despite getting exactly what he asked for, reminding him that the packaging was already covered in numerous warnings about the consequences of the wish. Bear demands a way to cancel his request, but the shopkeeper reiterates that it is strictly impossible. However, the old man offers one final piece of advice, suggesting that Bear finds someone else willing to buy a toy and make a wish that directly contradicts his own. Clutching at straws, Bear buys another One-Wish Willow and drives straight to Ian's house. Upon arrival, Ian admits that he has also noticed Nikki acting incredibly bizarre lately. He reveals that Nikki has been relentlessly spamming his phone with unsettling messages, demanding that he come over to Bear's house. Cornered by the truth, Bear finally confesses everything. He admits he made a wish using the One-Wish Willow, never actually believing the cursed object would work. Bear begs Ian to snap the new toy and wish for everything to go back to normal. To sweeten the deal, Bear promises that once the curse is lifted, Ian is free to pursue a real relationship with Nikki. Unfortunately, Ian thinks Bear has completely lost his mind. He scoffs at the story, stating that if he actually had a magic wish, he would rather wish for $1 million than ever get back together with Nikki. Suddenly, a massive downpour of $1,000 bills floods the room out of thin air. Bear screams in sheer agony as their absolute last hope vanishes in a flash of greed. With no options left, Bear returns home to face Nikki. He tries a desperate new tactic, attempting to soothe her by saying that he knows she would do absolutely anything for him. Suddenly, Nikki appears out of nowhere. Terrified, Bear tries to pacify her by pleading for her to do something for him. Instead, Nikki bursts into a panicked scream, enraged that Bear had briefly disappeared from her sight. Just then, Ian arrives at the house, completely caught off guard by the nightmare inside. In the midst of the utter chaos, Nikki suddenly draws a handgun and shoots Ian dead without a second thought.
Realizing he is trapped with a monster, a panicked Bear forces himself to look into her eyes and declare that he loves her more than anything. The lie successfully causes Nikki to soften, and her erratic behavior temporarily subsides. Capitalizing on the pause, Bear asks for permission to go to the bathroom to clean himself up. Inside the bathroom, an utterly broken Bear contemplates ending his own life. He stops himself from taking a violent way out, but his eyes suddenly land on the remaining prescription pills, making his final choice. Bear swallows every single pill in the bottle. He steps out of the bathroom and looks at Nikki with a calm smile, which she instantly reflects with a smile of her own. Bear walks toward her, but before he can reach her, the lethal overdose takes effect. He collapses to the floor and dies. Nikki bursts into hysterical tears upon realizing Bear is dead. Suddenly, Nikki snaps back to her completely normal self. Looking down at the horrific crime scene of a nightmare she was forced to commit, Nikki breaks down into true hysterical screams of terror. And that is the end of the story.